When my daughter-in-law said those words, "We got married yesterday," I thought I had misheard her. I looked at her face, calm and confident, not even a trace of guilt or hesitation. She said it like she was telling me the time of day, and in that moment I felt the world around me grow still. The clock on the wall kept ticking. The tea in my cup was still warm, but inside something froze. I turned to my son, Daniel. He didn't look at me. He just sat there, eyes down, hands clasped together, like a little boy who knew he had done something wrong but couldn't find the courage to say sorry. I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry. I wanted to smile, but my lips wouldn't move, so I just stared at the two of them, the son I had raised with everything I had, and the woman who had slowly taken him away from me. Finally, I said the only thing I could think of. "Oh, I see." It was all I managed. 3 small words that carried a storm inside them. They both smiled politely, as if that was the end of it, as if I wasn't supposed to ask why. I poured them more tea, pretending my hands weren't shaking. And in that moment, I realized something I never wanted to believe, that love can change, that the people you nurture, the people you would give your life for, can wake up one day and decide you no longer belong in their story. That night, after they left, the house felt heavier than it ever had. The silence pressed against my chest. Every sound, the wind, the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, felt too loud. I sat at the table long after the tea had gone cold. The cup she used was still there, a faint red lipstick mark on the rim. That tiny mark hurt more than any argument could have. It wasn't just a stain on a cup. It was proof. Proof that my son had a new world now, one where I was only a visitor. Daniel had always been close to me. After his father passed, it was just the two of us. We built a life together, simple but filled with love. He would call me every morning before work, and on weekends he'd help fix things around the house. When he met Clara, I was happy for him. She was smart, confident, modern, the kind of woman I thought would stand beside him proudly. But slowly, I began to notice small changes. Phone calls became shorter, visits became rarer, and when they did come by, Clara always spoke for both of them. I told myself it was normal. Every mother has to let go someday. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "You're being replaced." That day when they told me about the wedding, something inside me broke quietly, not out of anger, but out of realization. That moment wasn't just about a missed ceremony. It was about everything I had given being forgotten, the sacrifices, the prayers, the nights I stayed awake waiting for him to come home safe. I kept asking myself, why? Why didn't he tell me? Was I too controlling, too protective? Did he think I'd ruin his happiness? But the truth was simpler and crueler. He just didn't think I mattered in that moment. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still and cold. I made my coffee, sat by the window, and watched the light creep across the floor. Every corner of that room had a memory: birthdays, laughter, Daniel's first steps, the smell of his father's cologne. But now it all felt distant, like a dream I could no longer return to. I tried to distract myself, watered the plants, cleaned the shelves, even rearranged the furniture, but no matter what I did, that sentence kept echoing in my head. "We got married yesterday." 4 words, and yet they carried the weight of a lifetime. Around noon, Daniel called. His tone was light, too light. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said softly. He hesitated. "I hope you understand." It wasn't personal. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Of course, Daniel, as long as you're happy." But after he hung up, I whispered to the empty room, "You forgot who made you happy first." That evening, I opened the old wooden chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were photo albums, yellowed pages, edges curled with time. I turned each page slowly, tracing Daniel's smile through the years, his first day of school, his graduation, the last family photo we took before his father passed. In each picture, there was love, a mother's love that had no limits. And yet now, that same love felt like a burden he wanted to leave behind. As I closed the album, I whispered to myself, Maybe this is what motherhood really is, learning to love even when you're no longer needed. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The sky was dark, full of stars, but I couldn't find comfort in it. I thought of my husband, how he would have handled this. He always had a way of seeing the good, even in pain. Maybe he would have told me, let him go. If he's yours, he'll find his way back. But as I looked at the empty driveway where Daniel's car used to park every weekend, I couldn't help but wonder if he ever would. That night, before I went to bed, I whispered one last prayer, not for Daniel, but for myself. Lord, teach me how to let go without losing my heart. And that was how it began, the slow, quiet unraveling of a mother's love, and the journey toward finding peace again. If this story reminds you of someone you love, don't scroll yet. Sometimes the smallest stories hold the biggest lessons. Stay with me till the end, because this isn't just about loss. It's about how love, even when broken, can still teach us how to begin again. The next weekend, Daniel called again. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. Mom, Clara and I were thinking of visiting. She wants to help you reorganize the house. Make it feel fresher. I smiled faintly, even though my chest tightened. Reorganize? What's wrong with how it is? He laughed softly. Nothing's wrong. She just has an eye for these things. I didn't argue. I told myself it was harmless, just redecorating. But deep down, something uneasy stirred in me. When they arrived that Saturday, the house looked the same as always, neat, warm, full of memories. The smell of cinnamon tea lingered in the air. But as Clara stepped through the door, her eyes moved around the room like a buyer inspecting a house, not a guest visiting family. She touched the photo frames, the bookshelf, the lace curtain I had sewn years ago. Then she smiled, polite but cold. This place has good bones, she said. It wasn't a compliment, it was an evaluation. Daniel stood behind her, quiet, watching her every move like a man afraid to disagree. See, Mom? She's good at this stuff. I nodded, forcing a small smile. It's always been a good home. They sat down for tea. Clara barely drank hers. She just looked around, making little mental notes. I could almost see the thoughts forming behind her eyes. Too old-fashioned, too sentimental, too much of her. After a few minutes, she said, this room could look bigger if we moved some of your furniture out. It's a bit cluttered. Cluttered, I repeated softly. She gestured around. The rocking chair my husband built before Daniel was born, the side table he had carved with his own hands, the framed photos that told the story of our family. She saw clutter. I saw my life, but I didn't argue. I just said, if that makes you happy. So we moved things, or rather, they moved things. Daniel carried the rocking chair to the garage. Clara folded the old blanket that always hung over its back, the one I used on rainy nights, and said, this should go into storage. Each object they touched felt like a small goodbye. By the time they left, the living room looked cleaner, emptier, colder. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the center of the room and looked around. The walls were bare. The silence felt sharp, and for the first time, my own home didn't feel like mine anymore. That night, I made myself a cup of tea. As I sat in the quiet, I noticed the red cup Clara had used sitting on the counter. It still had her lipstick mark, a perfect curve, bold and bright. I thought of how she had smiled when she told me, we got married yesterday. The same calm tone, the same quiet confidence that told me she never doubted her place in my son's life. And I realized something I hadn't wanted to see before. Clara wasn't just organizing my house. She was organizing my role in their life, moving me quietly to the edges until I would eventually fade out. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Daniel again. When he finally called, it was during dinner. Mom, he said, Clara and I were wondering if we could talk about something important. Of course, I said. Is everything okay? He hesitated. It's about the beach house. My heart sank a little. The beach house wasn't just a property. It was the dream my husband and I built together. The place where Daniel learned to walk, where his father taught him how to fish, It held memories in its walls, laughter in its air. What about it? I asked. Clara's voice came on the line before Daniel could answer. We were thinking, she said cheerfully. It's such a lovely house, but it's a bit too much for you to maintain, isn't it? I froze. Her tone was sweet, but her meaning was sharp. I managed just fine, I said quietly. Oh, I'm sure, she replied. But think about it, and it's just sitting there. And Daniel and I could really use a place to start our own family. You'd still visit, of course, she said it so casually, like they were asking to borrow a book, not take over a lifetime of memories. Daniel added quickly, we could even sell it, Mom. Use the money to buy a home closer to us. It would be for all of us, really. All of us, I repeated softly. But what I heard was for them. I didn't argue. I just said, let me think about it. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, my phone still in my hand. The house was silent except for the sound of the clock ticking. That steady rhythm felt like a reminder that time was moving forward and somehow I was being left behind. The next morning, I drove to the beach house. The road was quiet, lined with trees, and when I reached the shore, the sound of the waves greeted me like an old friend. The wooden porch creaked as I stepped on it, and I could almost hear my husband's laugh echoing in the wind. I ran my hand over the railing, the same one he had built with his calloused hands. The paint was chipped, but the wood was still strong, just like the love that had built it. Inside, everything was still the same. The photo on the mantel, the smell of sea salt and pine, the blanket we used to share on stormy nights. And for a moment, I felt him there, as if he was reminding me this house isn't just walls, it's memory, it's love, it's ours. I sat on the porch for hours watching the waves roll in and out, and I whispered, what should I do, Robert? They want to sell what you built. A soft breeze brushed my face, and somehow I felt his answer in it, quiet but certain. Keep what's yours, protect what's sacred. When I returned home, I knew what I had to do. The following day, Daniel called again. Mom, he said, have you thought about what we discussed? Yes, I said calmly, but I'm not ready to make that decision. There was silence on the line. Then faintly, I heard Clara whispering, tell her we can't wait forever. Daniel sighed. Mom, we really need an answer soon. It's time to move forward. I closed my eyes, holding the phone against my ear. For years, I had helped him move forward, through school, through heartbreak, through life. But now, moving forward meant leaving me behind. I'll call you when I'm ready, I said, and ended the call. The house felt heavy with the weight of all that was unsaid, but for the first time I didn't cry. I just sat quietly, knowing something had changed forever. A few days later, I opened my mailbox and found a letter. My hands trembled as I read the words. Dear Mrs. Thompson, this is to confirm the sale of your beach property as discussed with your son and daughter-in-law. The rest blurred. I read the same line again and again, but it didn't make sense. They had sold it. Without asking, without telling me. I sank into the chair on the porch, my chest tightening. The ocean breeze carried memories of laughter, of Daniel running barefoot in the sand, of my husband's voice calling his name. Now all of it gone, or so I thought, because what Daniel and Clara didn't know was that my husband had left something behind, a secret only I knew, one that would change everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the waves echoed faintly in my mind, calm, steady, indifferent to my pain. I sat by the window, the realtor's letter still in my hands. It felt like betrayal printed on paper. Daniel had always been a good boy, quiet, kind, the kind of child who used to leave me little notes that said, I love you, Mom. But now he had sold something that didn't belong to him. I stared at his name on the letter, trying to understand how love could turn into something that cold. No warning, no conversation, just a decision made behind my back. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, it did, but because something inside me had gone still, like the sea before a storm. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf sat a small, rusted metal box. old, heavy, and untouched for years. My husband had given it to me a few months before he passed away. He'd said, "Promise me you won't open it until you truly feel alone." I had laughed then, brushing off his words, but now, sitting in that quiet room, I realized that moment had come. My hands trembled as I brought it down. The box creaked open, and inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, and a folded piece of paper beneath it. The envelope had my name written on it, Margaret, in his familiar handwriting. I held it to my chest for a moment before unfolding it. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and something has happened that has made you feel forgotten." I could almost hear his voice, steady, warm, the kind of tone he used when he wanted to calm me down after a long day. "I know you, my love. You give everything to the people you care about, and sometimes they take that kindness for granted. I've seen how you love Daniel, how you'd give him the world if he asked. But love shouldn't mean losing yourself." My breath caught. I felt my eyes sting, but I didn't look away. "That's why I've made sure you'll be safe, no matter what happens after I'm gone." I unfolded the paper beneath the letter. It was a notarized deed, stamped, signed, and dated. The ownership of the beach house transferred entirely to me, under my name alone, protected by a legal trust. The sale wasn't valid. Daniel and Clara hadn't sold my house. They'd sold something that never belonged to them. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The weight of what I was holding sank in slowly, like a tide rising. He had known, my husband had known, there would come a day when I'd need this, not just legally, but emotionally. He had left me protection wrapped in love. I whispered into the quiet, "Oh, Robert, you knew." And for the first time since Daniel's call, I smiled, not because I had won something, but because I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. The next morning, Daniel finally called. "Mom," he said carefully, "I wanted to talk before you get upset about the sale." "Upset?" I said softly. "No, Daniel, I'm not upset, just surprised you'd sell something that doesn't belong to you." He hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Your father left it to me," I said, "in a trust. The house is mine, Daniel, legally, and always has been." There was silence, then a faint whisper from Clara in the background, sharp, anxious. "Daniel, hang up." But he didn't. I heard his breathing, quick, shallow, unsure. "Mom, you can't do this to us," he said finally. "We already made a deal. We need that money." "No, Daniel," I said quietly. "You made that deal. Not me." He started to argue, his words stumbling, but I ended the call before he could finish. It wasn't out of anger, it was out of peace. For years, I had let him talk me into things. This time, I chose silence. The next day, I called my lawyer, a kind man who had handled my husband's estate years ago. When I told him what had happened, he sighed deeply. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "you're not the first mother to face this. Children sometimes forget that love isn't the same as permission. We'll take care of it within hours." He filed a legal notice that voided the sale. The beach house was safe, protected by the man who had built it with his hands and his heart. When the papers were finalized, I felt something lift inside me. Not triumph, not revenge, just relief. That evening, I sat by the window again, watching the sunset spill orange light across the sea. It looked just like the evening we had moved into that house, when Robert had wrapped his arm around me and said, "This is where we'll grow old, Maggie. You, me, and our boy." We hadn't grown old together for long, but somehow, even in his absence, he had kept his promise. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Clara stood there, alone. Her eyes were softer than usual, but her tone was still careful. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "we made a mistake. We didn't know about the trust. Daniel feels terrible. Please don't ruin his future over this." I looked at her, really looked. Behind her carefully chosen words, I saw guilt, but not remorse. She wasn't sorry for what they had done, only for being caught. "Clara," I said quietly, "you didn't ruin Daniel's future. You ruined his conscience, and that's far worse." Her expression hardened. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. "One day you'll be alone, and no one will care." Then she turned and left. I stood at the door for a long time after she was gone. Her words echoed, but they didn't pierce me. Maybe I would be alone one day, but I'd rather be alone with peace than surrounded by people who use love like a weapon. That night, I locked the deed back in the metal box. I placed it on the same shelf, only this time my heart was lighter. The house was safe. My husband's promise still stood. And for the first time in a long while, I slept without fear. The next few days felt strangely quiet. No calls, no visits, just silence, the kind that fills a house and seeps into your heart. I woke up early each morning, made myself tea, and watched the sunlight creep across the floorboards. It was peaceful, but it was also lonely, the kind of quiet that makes you remember every voice that used to fill the space. Still, I didn't cry, because deep down I knew that sometimes peace comes after pain, not instead of it. For so many years, I had lived for Daniel. Every meal, every plan, every decision, all shaped around his comfort. I thought that was love. But now, sitting in that still house, I began to realize that love shouldn't mean losing yourself in someone else's life. That evening, I took a slow walk around the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Everything had a memory. There was the rocking chair Robert built before Daniel was born, the table where we used to eat breakfast together, the window where Daniel once stood, waiting for his father to come home from work. Each object told a story, and each story reminded me that I had built a life worth remembering. I stopped in front of one photograph, Robert holding Daniel at the beach, both laughing, the sun shining behind them. I touched the frame gently. "I hope you're proud of him," I whispered, "and of me too." Later that week, my lawyer called again. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "the matter's been settled. The property's fully secure. No one can touch it without your approval." I thanked him and hung up, staring out the window. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control, not over others, but over myself. That same evening, I sat at the kitchen table and started to write in my old journal. It had been years since I'd written anything in it. The first line I wrote was simple. "Today I chose peace over approval." It felt right because that was the truth. I didn't hate Daniel or Clara, or hate would only keep me tied to them. I just wanted them to find their own path, even if it meant walking without me. A few days later, there was another knock at my door. This time, it was Daniel. He looked tired, older somehow, like life had suddenly weighed him down. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" I nodded and led him to the living room. He sat on the couch, his hands clasped together, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't know about the trust," he said. "Clara said it was the right thing to do. I thought, I thought it would make things easier for everyone." "Easier?" I repeated gently. "Daniel, stealing doesn't make life easier. It just makes love harder." He looked down. "I know. I just didn't want to disappoint her." I smiled sadly. "And in trying not to disappoint her, you forgot me." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I really am." I reached across the table and took his hand. It was trembling, just like when he was a little boy afraid of thunderstorms. "Daniel," I said softly, "I forgive you. But you need to forgive yourself too. Learn from this. Don't let it define you." He nodded slowly, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But love isn't something you earn. It's something you carry, even when it hurts." We sat in silence for a long time after that. No anger, no resentment, just quiet understanding, the kind that takes years to find. When he finally stood to leave, he turned to me at the door. "Mom," he said softly, "I'll make it right." Somehow I smiled faintly. "You already started." And then he was gone. That night, I sat by the window again, the sound of the ocean faint in the distance. The same waves that once felt so heavy now felt gentle, comforting. I thought about Robert. about how he had built not just a house, but a life strong enough to withstand loss. And I realized that love, when it's true, doesn't disappear when someone leaves. It stays in the walls, in the wind, in the way we keep going. Before I went to bed, I whispered a quiet thank you to him for protecting me, I said softly, even from the people I love. Then I closed my eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept peacefully, without fear, without doubt. That night, the ocean wind was stronger than usual. I sat by the window, watching the waves crash gently against the shore. The same sound that once meant comfort now felt like a reminder that life never stops moving, even when we want it to. The house was quiet, too quiet, but it was my quiet, my peace. For years I had feared silence, filling every empty moment with other people's needs, Daniel's problems, Clara's requests, everyone's expectations. But now the silence wasn't lonely, it was mine. I lit a candle, the one my husband and I used to keep by the bed. The soft glow spread across the room, touching the old photographs on the wall. In one of them, Daniel was only a child, missing his front tooth, smiling with pure joy. I smiled back at that picture, even as tears filled my eyes. He wasn't a bad son, just lost. Lost in a world that teaches people to measure love in money, not memories. The next morning, I went for a walk along the beach. The sand was cold beneath my feet, and the air smelled of salt and freedom. For the first time in a long while, I felt light, as if all the weight I'd been carrying had slowly begun to fade. I stopped near the old wooden dock where my husband used to sit every evening, watching the horizon. I whispered softly, I kept everything safe, just like you asked. A wave rolled in and touched my toes, as if answering back. I knew then that it was time to let go, not of love, but of pain. When I got back home, I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, and opened my journal. I began to write, not out of anger, but out of peace. I wrote about Daniel, about Clara, about love, and about the things we lose when we forget who we are trying to protect. Later that week, I received a letter from Daniel. It wasn't long, just a few sentences written in shaky handwriting. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. I started working again. Claire and I are figuring things out. Thank you for everything. I love you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the metal box where my husband's note had been. This time I didn't cry. I just smiled because I finally understood sometimes love doesn't mean holding on. It means giving space for others to find their own way back. Weeks passed. The beach house was quiet but alive, filled with the sound of waves, wind, and peace. I began painting again, something I hadn't done in years. Every brushstroke felt like a small act of healing. One afternoon, a young couple walked by and stopped to admire my garden. You have such a beautiful home, the woman said. I smiled. It's more than a home, I replied softly. It's a memory that taught me how to live again. That night, as the sun dipped into the sea, I whispered a small prayer of gratitude for love that once was, for pain that taught me strength, and for the peace I finally found within myself. And in that stillness, I realized something simple but true. We can't control who stays or who leaves, but we can choose how gently we hold our own hearts. I looked at the photo of my husband one last time and said, you were right, Robert. Love never ends, it just changes shape. Then I closed my eyes and let the sound of the sea carry my thoughts away. If you've ever felt forgotten by the ones you love, remember this. Your worth isn't measured by who stays. It's measured by the love you keep giving, even when no one sees it. And if this story touched your heart, thank you for staying until the end. Because every time you listen, you remind someone like me that love, no matter how broken, is never truly gone.